Hi, this is Debra Darvick, and I've got the delight and pleasure of interviewing author Dina Shtull, who wrote If My Talit Could Talk. And you please describe the book for me in one sentence.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. If My Talit Could Talk is about a young teen bored in the synagogue, doesn't understand all the fuss about the prayer shawl, questions what he had been taught, and then goes on an adventure to resolve the things that he finds very confusing about the ritual. The underlying theme is that our traditions are kept spiritually alive through interpretation, and that process is just as powerful in the mind of a child as it is in anybody else.
What inspired you to write this one? Like, what about the Talit and how did it all come together?
Well, my brother's thesis was about this, and he asked me it was a college thesis many years ago, and he's been wanting to have it in print, in accessible. So he asked me if I would take it from there. So it was up to me to decide on format, on audience, and how to condense this complicated college thesis. So that's what got me started. It wasn't my first book. I have written, my first book was a tale about my father. That's called Why the Rabbi Played Clarinet in the Sauna. Wow. And that was based on the life of my father, geared towards younger elementary school children. And this one is based towards upper elementary young teens, based on my brother's thesis.
I saw that it's illustrated by Dov Smiley, who has a connection here in Michigan when his father was the headmaster at Hillel. How did that come about that he was the one chosen as the illustrator?
My daughter knew him, and he was the one who connected us.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't easy, I have to say. He wasn't my first artist. I had another artist that didn't work out. I went like halfway through the process, and it didn't work out. She told me about him, and he was great. He was great.
That's terrific. Authors sometimes have their own writing quirks or their own routines. Do you have anything special that gets you into the zone when you sit down to work on your manuscripts?
I work at home, and I redesign my house a little bit so that I would have a perfect space. So my desk, I see out my front window, and I have flowers hanging, and I see that. And if I turn around, I could see my backyard, which is completely encased in this little mini forest. Mm. And I have 7 bird feeders back there. And it's just, I love my space. So it's at home.
What inspired you then to begin writing? You started with the story of your father, and that.
Yes, yes. It was that I wanted to leave a legacy of my father. I wanted his, we always say his memory shall be a blessing, and I wanted that to come alive. And I thought of I thought of all sorts of things. I could scan in photos, have them online. I could write a biography, have it online. Thinking that something online was going to last, more than 2 generations. And I thought it just doesn't feel accessible. And what's most accessible? I mean, to me, a children's book is most accessible. It's easy to pull off the shelf, doesn't take up a lot of space. Everybody enjoys a children's book. It's quick to read. Information is quick and fast, very accessible. And everybody walks away from a children's book smiling.
That's true.
So that was what drove me to get started.
And it's also with children's books, there's always the connection between the reader and the listener. There's always that emotional bond.
Very much so. And, the notion of the art and the word combination is also what came alive in this book.
For sure.
Because I had to decide what format to use. And it wasn't my first choice, but eventually I chose on this graphic novel style. And that was one of the things that I found particularly interesting and challenging and strong. Just that the two have to be so much in sync. The word and the format for the presentation of the word have to be in sync. And that's an interesting process. And, the book obviously connects the talit with the notion of a tent. But that prayer is just fascinating because it's found at the beginning of a prayer book. And the instructions underneath the prayer says, say this as you enter into the synagogue. So presumably, as soon as you see people wearing the prayer shawl, that's when you say, "How good are your tents, O Jacob?"
So it's like we have the chance of reenacting a sentence in Torah
Exactly.
every week. Thank you so much for spending time with me and spending time with our audience listening to this and watching it. And we look forward to having you at Book Fair November 13th.
Yeah, I look forward very much to it as well. And thank you for the time.
Absolutely. My pleasure.